Titus hovered over his laptop as he tried to find the words. He'd been at a standstill for weeks, and he needed to get it finished so he could... What exactly? So he could send it in and receive his latest rejection letter? He'd been writing for years. After he'd been laid off thanks to the pandemic, he'd written twice as much as he usually did. All it ever seemed to net him, though, was rejection. His wife was being patient about it, but as the bills racked up and the money coming in barely fed their family, he could tell that his joblessness was getting to her. Everything would be better if he could just get his hands on some money. If he could just finish this book, he knew it would get his life back on track. The idea had been brewing for years, but it was finally coming together. Forests of Ellenmore would be an earmark in great fantasy stories. There was action, intrigue, forbidden love, warring nations, and a believable magic system. It was so different from the Drek currently on the market. He knew it would be a bestseller, if only he could finish it. The computer chimed, drawing his attention from his passion project. Titus sighed as he glanced at the new email. Probably another late notice, or a message about his account being overdrawn. The sender was unfamiliar, though. A company named Libris Talent had a special offer just for him. Titus started to delete it, but something stopped him. Something nagged at him to open it. Maybe it was a life-changing offer he'd been waiting for. After some internal struggle, he decided to open it, wanting to see what sort of ridiculous offer they had made for him. He thought it was probably a sales pitch for a magazine subscription, knowing his luck, and prepared to be underwhelmed. As Titus read, though, he felt his eyebrows go up. This was a little more than a magazine subscription. Dear Mr. Harrow, we at Libris Talent have been following your recent hardships with great interest. We understand that times are hard just now, and we'd like to reach out a helping hand to struggling writers like yourself. We want to extend the chance to sell your talent to Libris Talent. We pay top dollar for talented individuals, and we would love to add your talent to our company's ever-growing pool. We look forward to your visit. See you soon, Mr. P. Seraph. There was a phone number at the bottom of the email, along with an address for Libris Talent. Titus looked at it for a moment, rereading the email, before closing it and starting his story again. Just as he'd thought, it was some sort of scam company trying to take advantage of people in the current climate. Titus started writing again, erasing more than he kept, but he found himself coming back to that email again and again. What sort of talent were they looking for? Were they offering work? Were they looking to represent him, maybe? The more he thought about it, the more intrigued he became. He could use the money, and if he didn't like what they had to say, he could always refuse. Titus reopened the email, and after Googling the address, he closed his laptop. The sooner he talked to them, the sooner he could get back to work. The address had not led him to a rundown strip mall, as he suspected it would, but to an elegant office building. It was clean, well-maintained, with a large sign over the door declaring it to be Libris Talent. This place looked more like a law firm than a fly-by-night operation, and Titus rechecked the address to make sure he had entered it correctly. Once he was sure that he had the right place, Titus stepped inside and was welcomed by a deep chime overhead. He was suddenly overcome with a strange sense of vertigo as he entered the lobby and grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. The starkness of the room shocked him at first glance, and the walls had a strange sort of depth to them that seemed bottomless. It hurt his head to look at them for too long, so he turned his focus on the rest of the room. There were no chairs, though, no love seats to mar the illusion, only a reception desk with a smiling woman manning it. Her smile was a trifle unsettling. Titus became worried that it might extend all the way back and slice the top of her head off just above the ears. Greetings, Mr. Harrow. Go right ahead. Mr. Seraph's been expecting you, she said, pointing to a door behind the desk. Titus was suddenly hesitant. How did you know who I was? We've been expecting you, she said, still flashing that brilliantly unsettling grin. Go ahead, sir. It's no good keeping Mr. Seraph waiting. Titus wanted to question her further about the mysterious Mr. Seraph, but felt it might be safer to just do as she said. She had turned that smile away from him, returning to her work, and he was left with no option but to proceed or leave. He walked into the hallway, lined with identical white doors that bore little name plaques. The hallway seemed to go on much farther than the outside of the building would have led him to believe, and Titus wondered if it were some sort of illusion. As he walked, he thought he could hear strange sounds coming from behind some of the doors, but it made him feel uncomfortable to linger outside for too long. He walked until he found Mr. Seraph's door and knocked. He was invited into an office as stark as the lobby. Mr. Seraph, it seemed, was a minimalist, and his office contained a desk, 2 chairs, and a black book with a handsome silver pen sitting inside of a holder. It had none of the photos or clutter common to a working man's desk, and Titus found this as odd as the office itself. Mr. Seraph was a well-kept man who looked about 30, his blond hair curtaining his face in a European style, as meticulous as his white suit. When he smiled, Titus suddenly felt the urge to run. His too wide grin reminded Titus of the Cheshire Cat, his two big eyes reminding him of the big bad wolf. Titus was suddenly very afraid of being gobbled up, bones and all. If Mr. Seraph noticed his discomfort, it didn't seem to bother him. "Ah, Mr. Harrow, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Titus sat without really meaning to. The man's voice compelled him with its dulcet tones, and it made him forget about his unease for the millisecond it took him to plant his rump. This also put him at eye level with the strange book, and Titus felt his eyes drawn to it as it hunkered on the desk. Titus almost imagined he could see it breathing, watching him, liking him so close, so it might suddenly leap out and, "I trust you found the office easily. It wasn't likely to be what you expected, I'd wager." How did you know that I'd come?" Titus stammered, dragging his eyes off the strange book. "Oh, we've been assessing your talent for quite some time. We feel it could use a more ambitious hand, someone likely to make better use of it. We would like to utilize your talent, as we do with many unambitious individuals. You will be compensated, of course. Times are hard, and a man with no job has to feed his family somehow. What do you say? Do we have a deal?" he purred, putting the bait out like a talented angler. Titus, however, was wary. This smiling man seemed to know all about him, but Titus knew nothing about who he was or what he expected. Who the hell was this guy? He was certain he'd never seen anyone like this before, but somehow he knew all about Titus. How long had he been watching him? Why was he so interested in his talent, as he called it? "How is it that you know so much about me, but I've never seen you before in my life?" "Oh, we know a lot about you, Mr. Harrow. We know you've been out of work for almost a year. We know your wife has become the sole breadwinner for the household and is barely getting by. We know you're in a great amount of debt. We also know that the debt is likely to get deeper without a miracle or untimely access to your life insurance." Titus started to become indignant, but Mr. Seraph put up a hand. "But that is behind you now. With the money we intend to pay you for your considerable talent, you can live the life of a free man once again. Take back what was stolen from you. Clean the slate. A fresh start. What do you say?" Suddenly there was a check in Mr. Seraph's left hand and a pen in his right. Titus could see $20,000 scrawled on the value line and felt his anger disappearing. With that kind of money, he could settle his debts. He could survive until this pandemic was over if he was careful. He could get out from under the funk he'd been squashed beneath for so long. The black book was open between them. When had that happened? It seemed to be waiting, greedily longing for his signature. For his talent. Titus took up the pen shakily, a sweaty hand taking the check and stuffing it into his pocket. He signed his name on the rough top sheet of the book. As his name lay across the pages, he tried to pull his hand back, but it was outside his control now. It moved furiously, the words spilling from the pen across the page. Pages became sentences, paragraphs, chapters, and finally, whole novels, as Titus only watched in horror. The pages riffled, turning, accepting his ink, accepting his talent, and Titus screamed and begged for it to stop. His hand, however, gave away all he had and more. The pages swallowed it all, swelling to a monstrous size as he wrote. Titus didn't know how much he had in him, and soon the ink began to trickle from the page like an oozing wound. It pooled around him, rising like a tide, and he saw Mr. Seraph's smile disappear beneath the liquid tar before his vision was covered in murk. Even as he descended into blackness, he wrote. He awoke on the couch, breathing heavily, the evening news just finishing up. In entertainment news, it looks like fans of Mark Daniels will have something to celebrate soon. He tweeted today that he's began a new novel, Tribes of Ellenmore. Fans of his talented writing, such as myself, can't wait. Titus shuddered. That was his book. His story. Not anymore, though, it seemed. It was gone now. And as he sat on the couch, he tried to remember. He couldn't even think of what it had been about, though. It had been a fantasy story, set in somewhere. There had been elves. It was gone, though. It was all gone. Titus remembered the pages upon pages in the black book and wondered if it was the only thing that was gone. He felt something in his pocket and reached in to find the crumpled check. Paid to Titus Harrow, $20,000. On the memo line, it said, "For your talent." Titus now suspected that this transaction had been more Faustian than he had believed. As the check said, Mr. Seraph had purchased more than a book. He had purchased his talent. He felt tears slide down his face as he came to realize what he had sold. In the end, it might have been less painful to sell his soul than his talent.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you haven't already, I always suggest hit that subscribe button, maybe go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stories that we do here. I've got a link below to my latest book if you'd like to pick up your own copy. Follow the link below down to Amazon, and if you'd prefer a signed one, get up with me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you'd like to support the show in a more monetary way, might I suggest heading on down to Patreon. We have several tiers. I'm sure you'll find something that'll suit you. I always recommend my $10 tier, which is my Ghostly Reader tier. You get a signed copy of my book on your doorstep anytime I write one, which is, on average, about twice a year. Speaking of my awesome patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.